entities, and relationships. At the end of this video, you will be able to discover and analyze business data to understand the operations carried out in a business. Identify the boundaries of a system. Identify entities, attributes, data types, and relationships of data. Review business rules to determine the impact. And document data requirements using an entity relationship diagram. Introduction to data model. An effective database design is one that clearly communicates the data and relations among them to the analyst, database designers, programmers, and users. But these individual roles have different perceptions in handling the data. The consequence of this conflict is a poor database design that does not meet the user needs. Data modeling helps understand the nature of data and their relationships and easily communicate them among the analyst, the designers, programmers, and users. Hence, data modeling is placed as the first step in designing a database. In this video, let us see how data modeling helps in designing a database using a simple scenario. As part of their development program, the ABC School in Sydney decides to provide international quality education to their students. One of the activities in their action plan is to attract more students to utilize their school library. So, they renovate their library with an interesting theme. However, to their surprise, there is no improvement in the number of students utilizing the library. Enquiring with the librarian and the students, they come to know that it is complex to search for the availability of books in the library, as most of the activities are recorded manually and some data are recorded in spreadsheets. It is also difficult for the librarian to record manually the details of books issued and returned. So, the management decides to automate the activities in the library and approaches a software development company. Before creating the application for the library management system, the database analyst of the software development company approaches the school to analyze the existing business data and understand the operations involved in the library. Discovering business data. The first step in data modeling is to discover and analyze the business data. To derive the requirements of the library management system, the database analyst should clearly understand the operations carried out in the library. Hence, he analyzes the existing manual data and the data available in the spreadsheets. He also gives questionnaires to understand the activities involved in the current system and the issues in detail. Then, he interviews selected teachers, students, and the librarian to identify the issues they face in the library. The librarian says that the members do not wait while he records the details of books issued. The students and teachers say that the librarian takes too much time to check the availability of a book and they need to stand in queue to record the entries for borrowing and returning of books. To identify the actual problem, the database analyst calls for a meeting with the librarian, teachers, students, and the management and arrives at a consensus. From the analysis of existing data, interviews, and meetings conducted with the stakeholders, the database analyst identifies the following activities. Activities involved in borrowing books. Some members reserve their books for borrowing by sending mails to the librarian. Members register their entity in the library attendance register. They search for books in the library based on book title, author, or publisher and check its availability. They submit the books to the librarian for entry. The librarian records the borrowing details and the members leave the library. Activities involved in returning books. Members register their entry in the library attendance register. They return the borrowed books to the librarian. The librarian records the details of the books returned. He also collects fine on late returns. The members may borrow some other books or just leave the library. Activities involved in purchasing books. Librarian gets the requirement for books. He contacts the accounts department for the purchase of books. He orders the suppliers and purchases the books. He enters the book details in the records. The next step in designing a database is to identify the boundaries of the system. The database analyst provides the identified requirements and discusses with the management to decide the final requirements. The management feels that the requirements are extensive and they will consume more time to implement the system. Hence, to find a quick solution, the management requests the database analyst to create a system that expedites the process of searching, borrowing, and returning books to the library. The database analyst discards many of the requirements and arrives at the final list of requirements. From the analyzed business data and boundaries, few of the operations like members reserving books, members' attendance, collecting fines on late returns, getting new requirements, contacting accounts department for purchase and ordering, and purchasing the books are removed. So, the final requirements list contains only the operations within the boundaries as shown on the screen. The next step in the process is to identify the entities, attributes, data types, and relationships of data. The basic building blocks of a data model are entities, attributes, and relationships. Entity and entity set. An entity is a real-world object that can be easily identified or distinguished from other objects. A collection of similar types of entities that share the same properties is called an entity set. Attributes. The properties of an entity are called attributes. Data types. A data type is the type of data that an attribute can hold. Relationship. A relationship is the association that exists among entities. Relationship set is a set of relationships of same type. From the requirements gathered in our library management system, the nouns involved, book, member, and librarian, are identified as the entity sets. However, as the librarian is also a member, the librarian entity set can be discarded. The attributes associated with the book entity set are book ID, title, author, price, publisher, and availability, while the member entity set holds the attributes member ID, name, password, address, membership start date, and membership end date. Now, let us identify the data type of each attribute. For example, book ID is a number, and hence it is of number data type, whereas title, author, and publisher values are a set of characters and hence they are of string data type. The availability data types holds either yes or no, hence it is marked as Boolean data type. Similarly, the data types of the attributes of member entity set are marked as shown on the screen. An activity involved in the process is a member borrows or returns books. The action verb borrows or returns acts as the relationship that exists between a member and book. For borrowing or returning a book, the following attributes are required to be stored: issue date, due date, and return date. Hence, they are marked as attributes for the relationship borrows or returns. Another activity involved in the process is a member searches for a book. The action verb searches acts as another relationship that exists between member and book entity sets. The next step in the process is to identify the business rules. A business rule is a brief and clear description that defines the policy, procedure, or principle of the system. The database analyst should also consider the business rules for designing the database. As a business rule, the management suggests the analyst to add restriction to the number of books borrowed based on the member. To represent this, member type attribute is added to the member entity set, so that based on the member types, the maximum allowable books can be restricted programmatically. Similarly, the management suggests another restriction where a member should return books in a maximum of 2 weeks. This restriction can also be implemented programmatically with the help of due date and return date attributes. Cardinality. Another important term in defining the relationship is cardinality. Cardinality defines the number of entities in one entity set, which can be associated with the number of entities in another set via a relationship set. There are different types of relationships based on cardinalities. One-to-one relationship. In one-to-one relationship, an entity of entity set A can be associated with at most one entity of entity set B and vice versa. One-to-many relationship. In one-to-many relationship, an entity of entity set A can be associated with more than one entity of entity set B. However, an entity of entity set B can be associated with at most one entity in entity set A. Many-to-one relationship. In many-to-one relationship, an entity of entity set A can be associated with at most one entity of entity set B. However, an entity of entity set B can be associated with more than one entity of entity set A. Many-to-many relationship. In many-to-many relationship, an entity of entity set A can be associated with more than one entity of entity set B and vice versa. In our library management system, a member can borrow or return any number of books, whereas a book can be borrowed by only one member at a time. So, the relationship borrows or returns of the member entity set to book entity set is one-to-many. Similarly, a member can search any number of books and a book can be searched by any number of members. So, the relationship searches of the member entity set to book entity set is many-to-many. The next step in the process is to document the data requirements using an entity relationship diagram. We have seen how the analyst analyzed the tasks that are carried out in the library during the requirement phase and recorded them as business descriptions. These descriptions do not always give a clear idea to create an effective database. So, the descriptions are first converted to a high-level data model before creating the database. There are many models that can be used. ER model is one such high-level data model that clearly explains how the elements of a database relate to each other. The ER model defines the conceptual view of a database. It works around the real-world entities and the associations among them. The ER diagram is the graphical representation of the ER model that is simple and easy to understand. Now, let us see how to represent the identified entities, attributes and relationships for the library management system in an ER diagram. Out of the notations available, we shall use the crowfoot notations as they clearly explain the components of the ER diagram. First, let us find out how to represent the book entity set and its attributes in the ER diagram. As book is an entity set, it is represented using a rectangle. The attributes of the book are represented using ellipses. The book entity set and its attributes are connected using the lines. Similarly, the member entity set can be represented using a rectangle, and its attributes are represented using ellipses and connected using lines. Now, let us see how to represent the relationship borrows or returns. The diamond is used to represent the relationship and its attributes are represented using the ellipsis. The relationship borrows or returns and its attributes are connected using lines. Finally, the lines connect the entity sets member and book to the relationship borrows or returns. The relationship borrows or returns that exists between member and book is one to many. Leaving the line as it is represents one on the member entity set and a crow's foot represents many on the book entity set. The other relationship searches of member entity set to book entity set is shown on the screen. The relationship searches that exists between member and book is many to many. Hence, a crow foot is drawn on the lines of both the entity sets that connect to the relationship set. Thus, the database analyst communicates the design to the stakeholders using the ER diagram for library management system. This ER diagram is taken for further activities involved in the database designing process. Summary: in this video, you have learned that the database analyst analyzes the existing business data, conducts interviews, provides questionnaires, and conducts meetings to derive the requirements. The database analyst discusses with the stakeholders and draws a boundary to the system. He identifies the entity sets, attributes, and relationships from within the boundaries of the requirements. He applies the business rules, which are brief and have clear descriptions of the policies, procedures, or principles of the system. Finally, he draws the ER diagram based on the identified entity sets, attributes, and relationships. Following these steps enables you to draw an effective ER diagram for any system